wow. And I never got a call from the doctors, from the pain clinic or from his regular doctor saying, what did you do? This is the way it often is in medical practice. It's like if it's something new, it's a little off the wall, it sounds like it's too futuristic, too Star Trek-like, people ignore it. They don't pay attention to it because they're too busy. They're in disbelief because of medical research now is not to be trusted so much, and even the mainstream doctors know that. And they have to go out of their way to learn something when they're already stressed out.
Well, speaking of that, how science-based is medicine?
That's a really good question. You know, there have been some clinical studies on this. There have been 3 in particular. One done by the Office of Technology and Assessment in 1979, another in 1991, and another in 1993, one published in the Journal of the American Medical Association and the other in the British Medical Journal. And all 3 of them asked the same question, and they studied how medicine is practiced. And the number they came up with that talks about the amount of good medicine that's scientific, that's in our practice of medicine every day, was not what most people thought. Most people think that it's very science-based. You talk to doctors, and they're going, yeah, 90%, maybe 95%, maybe 85%. Occasionally you'll hear somebody say 80%. But the number these 3 groups came up with was 15%. When I read that, it sort of blew me away.
And then the doctors get mad at you for burying the news, huh?
Well, it's like, please don't shoot the messenger. But they went a little further. I mean, one of these studies looked at the amount of good, solid science that's in the medical literature. And I'm talking about New England Journal of Medicine, like Marcia Angel was talking about at the introduction of this show, and Catherine DeAngelis of the Journal of the American Medical Association, and Ushman Neal of the Journal of Clinical Investigation, who all quit their jobs after working there for decades, saying they were disillusioned, disenchanted, disappointed with the poor quality of research that was going into their journals.
Well, I remember recently there was just an article in the paper about a Dr. Scott Rubin that fabricated 21 different studies.
Right.
That's
well, you
pretty
see
scary.
That too. I'd say that have to be the exception rather than the rule. You don't see much of that, but you do see it.
But the fact that he got by with it.
Well, that's true. He did get by with it. But the real problem is that people who are publishing information have a conflict of interest most of the time. And who's doing most of the research?
The pharmaceutical companies.
They spend twice as many billions of dollars as the National Institutes of Health does. And when they publish an article, they're 4 to 8 times as likely to make an article look like it's positive than when it's reviewed by independent researchers. And the reason for that is they want to sell their drug.
Well, like what happened with Vioxx. Can you briefly tell that story?
Well, yeah, that's one of the worst examples of all time. And there you're looking at a drug where this drug company knew before they came out with it in 1999 that there were problems with it that were huge, that were going to cause deaths from heart attacks and strokes. They knew that. They knew that 5 years before. They concealed the information, okay, from the FDA, and they came out with it anyway with the idea that they could go ahead and sell this. It would be a blockbuster drug, and they did for about 5 years. They made over $2.5 billion a year on the sale of the drug. So over the course of the 5 years they were there, they made a lot of money.
And people were dying and having heart attacks.
40 or 50,000 people died because of that. They knew that there would be lawsuits against them, but they sold a total of close to $15 billion of drug. And they figured, okay, fine, so $5 billion of it will go back to pay off the lawsuits, and we've got a $10 billion profit. Well, there's something wrong with that thinking, and it's reflective of what's happening in research today.
They're more interested in the money.
Well, you follow the dollars, and you'll see what's happening.
And that also, haven't they found that some of the members of the FDA have a conflict of interest also? Some of them have stocks in the pharmaceutical companies.
It's in the range of 30%. And then when you look at people who are connected with big pharma at medical schools that are teaching, 60% of the department heads are connected with big pharma in some way, either getting some kind of research grant or some kind of perk or something from them. So the information that we're getting that's being presented to our medical students today and is being presented to our doctors at conferences that are sponsored by this industry is really, it's a conflict of interest that's huge.
So who funds the studies that study supplements, like, for example, with vitamin D? because vitamin D, we've been hearing about it actually more lately, about the benefits of it.
Well, some of this is researched to some extent by research that's funded by the National Institutes of Health. You're not going to see head-to-head studies from the pharmaceutical industry with vitamin D and something that they want to promote. You won't see, for example, somebody looking at the bisphosphonates like Fosamax or Boniva or one of those drugs compared to vitamin D and vitamin K and strontium and things like that. So it's basically the job of the people who are manufacturing the products to come up with the research. It should clearly be the job of the National Institutes of Health to fund this research, because we, the people, are paying for it, and we want to have safe approaches in our practice. And that's not what's happening so much. So a lot of this wonderful work that needs to be done simply isn't done.
One of the things that I've noticed with Western medicine is that in Western medicine we tend to fight disease and go after it and attack it and refer to it as a war a lot of times, like the war on cancer and so forth.
Sure.
What about defenses? What about on the defense? What about building up our immune system and being strong so that we can resist some of these things?
Well, now you're talking about what's been the practice of medicine, the spirit of medicine in indigenous healing systems for thousands of years. Build up the strength of the defenses that we have. Do what you can to make immunity better. Live a lifestyle that's healthy. Eat healthy food, exercise, sleep right. Get enough exercise is a critical thing. All these approaches in lifestyle are crucial and what we should be focusing on as the primary thing. Okay, so that's what we're missing.
Well, what about how our cells work? What about the functioning of our cells and how that relates to prevention and also to being defensive?
If all of our cells are healthy, it's simple. We cannot be sick. It's impossible. And there are only 4 ways a cell can malfunction. You can not give it what it needs to be able to do its work, meaning if you don't give it the raw materials it needs, it's like an industrial plant. If you don't put in all the nutrients that are required to make certain products, you can't. If you have bad genetics and you can't make certain products, that will make you sick. Third, if you have emotional or spiritual issues, we know how much what we think and feel affects our biochemistry and physiology. And fourth, if you put something in a cell that's toxic, that's going to disturb its function, whether it be a microbe or some toxic environmental substance or physical trauma, you've just defined what causes every disease that there is. So your cells will be healthy if they have good nutrition and they get everything they need, if there are no genetic defects, if there are no toxic exposures, and there are no psychospiritual problems.
And then also, on the other hand, even though you're getting the proper foods, you still have to be able to absorb them and digest them and metabolize them and transport them.
Nutritional medicine becomes a very complex thing. It should be part of every physician's armamentarium, and we should be teaching that regularly in our medical schools.
I know many years ago, like when I was a child, I never really heard of anybody getting cancer. And I know when Nixon became president, he wanted us to have a war against cancer. But when you do your research and you go back to the 1950s, cancer has increased 89% since 1950.
Yes.
That's huge. It's almost gotten, I think I was reading recently someplace where they said that 1 in 2 people will end up getting cancer sometime in their lifetime.
Yeah, some studies do show that, and that's a big concern. 100 years ago, a heart attack was reportable. Cancer wasn't that common. We've done something different. It certainly isn't our genetics that's caused all this problem with us to change things. So we've got to do something to go back to the basics. There's not that much science in medicine. We know that. There is some. 15% isn't going to cut it. We need to do more integrative, holistic, person-centered, and preventive strategies if we're going to do something to return to healing.